start recording right now. This is the event is now starting the recording for this event. Let's know for all the participants today, let us know how we can improve these webinars by sending us any comments. My email is included in the invite, so please reach out to us and let us know how we are doing with these events, and we'll really love to improve on them. With that, the topic today is integrated water resources management, or management and planning. Some places it's called IWRM, that's the short for it. And it's a cross-sectoral policy and management approach designed to replace the traditional fragmented sectoral approach to water resources and management that has impacted services and led to unsustainable resource use. Integrated water resources management and planning is based on the understanding that water resources are an integral component of the ecosystem, a natural resource, and a social and economic good. The basis for integrated water resources management is that the many different uses of finite water resources are interdependent. With that, to scratch only the surface of this topic today, I'm so grateful to our speakers today to dedicate time to talk to us about the topic, and I'm so excited to introduce them to you. We have three presenters today. We'll start with the order of the presentations. The first presenter is Stephanie Agnagnusson, and I hope that I am pronouncing the name right. Stephanie is the Director of Water and Natural Resources for Madera County in California. Stephanie has worked in both the urban and rural sectors for water. She is a geologist and oversees the department, which includes 3 groundwater sustainability agencies and a flood control agency. She has worked in programs funded through California's Integrated Regional Water Management since 2010. Our second presenter is Dan Haddock from Interra. Dan is a consultant. He is the Director of Water Utility Services at Interra. He has over 25 years of experience in planning, development, and management of water resources and infrastructure. Dan has first-hand knowledge of the utility business as a former engineer manager for 35 water and wastewater utilities in Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and Michigan. Dan is active in professional organizations, holding leadership roles in national AWWA committees, and is a licensed PE in multiple states. Our last presenter is Erin Mori. Am I saying that right, Erin? Okay. Erin is the Director of Demand Management and Resilience Policy at New York City Department of Environmental Protection, where she advances strategic planning and programming for drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater sustainability in that department, Integrated Water Management Group. Erin has 9 years of experience in water resources planning and policy, and holds a Master of Public Administration degree from Columbia University. With that, I will ask all of us here in the metro area to join me to thank all the presenters. And with that, I will start with Stephanie, please.
Great, thank you for inviting me. I think you have to turn me into a presenter to share, because that button's grayed out right now.
Oh,
Yep, there it is.
It's working now.
I am now a presenter. Okay, I'm going to try to share. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Let me see if I can get the panel to disappear so that I can go to presentation mode. All right, I don't think I can trick it. So let me, I'm just going to show you this version bigger. Okay, so thank you for inviting me. I'm Stephanie Agnagnusson from Madera County in the heart of California. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about California's flavor of integrated water resource management, We call it our Integrated Regional Water Management, or IRWIM. And I'll talk to you just a little bit about what we've been able to do with it, both statewide as well as here within Madera County. So a quick story. I started working in water resources for a mutual water company in 2004. It was mutual water companies are private, they're co-ops in California. And we struggled with a lot of issues as a board member. The impending drought, we had really old pipes that needed replacement. We had a rate structure that was seriously outdated. We had customers who complained about the quality of the water they received, whether it was the color or the flavor or too much particulate matter from it being hard. And even for this little water company that was private and only served 70 homes, those issues are exactly the same sorts of things that we dealt with when I worked for an urban water contractor at the State Water Contractors, Castaic Lake Water Agency. We had issues with water rates, customer satisfaction, aging infrastructure, and the drought and changing climate patterns. So one of the powerful things that integrated water resources management can do is allow you to see that we all as water organizations work with the same types of problems. So I think you'll probably see some of your challenges here with us in Madera County. So what is our version of integrated water resources planning called Integrated Regional Water Management? It is a collaborative effort to coordinate management of many types of water. So water supply issues, water quality issues, wastewater issues, and flood and stormwater issues. Those are all addressed in our IRWIM, or Integrated Regional Water Management. So what are the benefits for this in California? So the first thing to know is this is not a required approach. However, it is highly encouraged. Like many things in our state, it's kind of a carrot approach. And the carrot is that there are very large sums of money available if you are working with integrated regional water management within California. And you'll see some of those sums of money in projects that we've been able to build in a second. So it builds the capacity when organizations work together cooperatively. We can learn from one another. We are able to develop projects that work upstream and downstream. Madera County has the majority of it is actually in the foothills and the mountains. And then we have a sizable portion on the valley floor in the Central Valley. And of course, it's funding to access to funding opportunities. So if it's voluntary, why would you do it? Well, I did mention money, but it also encourages a long-term perspective. It makes us think broadly about benefits. We get out of our little silo. We're not just thinking of things as the little mutual water company where I started out talking about. We're looking at multiple water agencies, benefits and costs to all. And it's really a good way to actually talk through water resources challenges like the drought as well, because you have all of the agencies at the same table. We've also found that it strengthens our regional clout. We can lobby for kind of money and resources to be devoted in different ways. So basically it reduces costs for individuals and it grows the benefits for all. So that is why we engage in this approach. Statewide, you can see this is a long time in coming with some very big dollar amounts. So the Integrated Regional Water Management Act is back in 2002. And then there's a series of bond measures that devoted lots and lots of money to people who had integrated regional water management groups and plans. So the plan in IRWIMP is the way to access the money. So who participates? You can see statewide, there's different funding areas. I used to be in funding area 4 down here, which is the Los Angeles area. That was a very, very competitive group of people. And we are now in 2, a mountain area funding and a San Joaquin area funding group. But that's how IRWIM works in our state, is funds are given by funding areas. So it's important to know kind of where you are. So here's our own history of how we have worked with IRWIM. You can see after the act was passed, we started developing our first IRWIM plan, or an IRWIMP. And that went over a multi-year period. We formed a regional water management group, and that has all of the irrigation districts. It has water agencies, water companies, county, city, flood control, all meeting monthly around the same table. There was a pretty substantial lobbying effort to set the borders for our regional group that would incorporate all of the counties so that we could deal with upper and lower watershed issues. And then we started getting a series of substantial grants. This $9 million here in 2011 and 2012 did a substantial amount of brush removal in the foothills, so fire risk reduction. That was a Forest Service project. And it combined it in a portfolio with a project to remove arundo, which is an invasive plant in our flood control system down here. So lots of really different projects could be combined for funding. So what we have continued to do is use IRWIM statewide to get additional funds. And most recently, what we've done is smart meters. In a couple of different places, one in the foothills and then in a couple more urban areas down in the valley. So that's the sort of funds that are available. We are in those 2 funding areas, both a mountain county one and a San Joaquin River funding area, which is down in the valley floor. And here are the types of projects that we are able to fund with IRWIM in California. We have experience with most of these. Is it something where you want to bring in more water or connect people or expand a distribution system? That's a project that could be funded by IRWIM. Wastewater projects haven't been popular in our area, but they are popular elsewhere. When I was in the Los Angeles funding area, we had a sanitation district project that was installing UV treatment. That was in our IRWIM and funded through that. There's restoration projects, so things that are more kind of ecosystem related. We've been able to fund planning work as well as implementation work. Fuel load management was part of our $9 million funding, reducing the fuel load in the Sierra. Pollution and pollution prevention can sometimes be the sorts of things that we fund. And then also stormwater and floodwater projects. And I talked through the non-native with arundo eradication and removal. So most recently in IRWIM in California, there's an interest in water recharge projects. That's because although IRWIM is this big tent and umbrella, a lot of our efforts as a state have been focused with groundwater sustainability and something called SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So many of us who work in IRWIM think that the way to get funding for these projects we may see many, many more water recharge and groundwater recharge projects in IRWIM in the future. So that's just kind of a brief overview of what we've been able to do with integrated water resource planning locally. And I have a couple of websites here. The MaderaCountyWater.com is our main county website, and then the Regional Water Management Group is the place, it's the IRWIM group locally that meets and has been able to bring all of that funding in. And then I've included the state page on IRWIM so you can learn a little bit more about that. And although I'm doing the presentation, Jeannie, our deputy director, has a lot of experience in getting everybody to the same table from very, very different types of water resource management. So that concludes my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing right now.
Thanks, Stephanie. And while we are having Dan getting ready to share his presentation, we have a couple of minutes for questions to Stephanie if you have any specific questions to Stephanie. And again, you can share your, I think there is a question in the chat. Are the grants from the state?
Yes, in the case of IRWIM in California, they are all state bond and state grants.
Okay. If someone has any other question, please let us know and we'll introduce it. So the question, there is another question, how were the smart meters utilized?
So we have, well, the smart meters were used to replace some aging meters in one case, and then they were used for an area that surprisingly was unmetered. So the smart meters basically save in terms of meter reader time by sending all of the water data to a main location at the water utility where the information can be read and processed and then turned over to billing.
Any other questions? Cannot see. I'm not sure if Lani, if you can see hands, if someone is raising their hand.
I don't see anybody at the moment, but feel free to do a shout out if I've missed you.
Sure. So there is another question. In addition to the collaboration within the county, is there also collaboration with external?
Yes, there's a group called the Round Table of Regions that meets monthly, and that's a statewide group where they talk about project successes and challenges. So IRWIM in California is a pretty robust effort, but it also has 20 years of history behind it. So you can see that changing things in water resources takes some time.
Has you seen any impacts from COVID on the processes and things are changing?
Oh, so interesting question. So our group rotated where it met originally. So we would all drive, and the county is very big. So we would alternate between Oakhurst, which is in the mountains. We met at the back of a supermarket. And then Madera, we met in our county government center. And then in Chowchilla, we met at the city. So it was kind of a slog. Some of those were an hour to get to. So our attendance was typically somewhere between like 10 and 15 people, whoever was kind of close locally. But with COVID, we've switched to doing it as a Zoom meeting. And we have around like 40 people with a lot more local participation. So hopefully we will be able to continue that because it's actually made it much more accessible.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I will transfer to the second presenter, Dan Haddock. So Dan, take it over. Thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah, Ali, I think you need to, my share button's grayed out. Can you transfer it over to me?
Dan, are you able to share? You are a presenter now.
Okay, let's see.
Yes.
There we go. I think it's coming now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can see it now.
You see it now? Great.
Yes,
All right.
thank you.
Great. All right. Yeah, well, thank you, Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you. My name is Dan Haddock. I'm the Director of Water Utility Services for Intera. The agency that I'm going to talk about that I have knowledge of is it actually operates in the same California framework that Stephanie discussed. So, some of the funding issues and things apply to this as well. I'm going to be focusing on one regional agency's efforts to support collaboration. And we've been working with the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, or IEUA, for the past few years to develop a decision support model for collaborative planning to improve regional water supply resiliency. And these planning efforts that they're involved in, they involve many challenges that I'm sure are familiar to all of you: water quality, supply reliability, engaging stakeholders from multiple agencies, opportunities to collaborate to share benefits and costs, and making decisions related to very complex systems under uncertain conditions, and the need for tools to help visualize results and have productive discussions about the best path forward. There we go. So the little bit about the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, and I'm just going to refer to it as IUA because that's a mouthful. IUA was formed over 70 years ago in 1950. It covers an area about 242 square miles and serves a population of just under 900,000 people. They're a wholesale supplier of imported water from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, or MWD. And that water comes from the State Water Project, which is the famous project that brings water from the north of California down south. They provide regional wastewater collection and treatment and are also a supplier of recycled water. In total, the regional water use is about 200,000 acre feet per year, or 65 billion gallons per year, about 180 million gallons per day average. IUA has a regional mission. They support planning and various regional initiatives: water efficiency, drought planning, groundwater basin management, and funding of regional projects. There are 8 member agencies in the IUA service territory. These include privately and publicly owned water agencies, including the cities of Chino Hills, Cucamonga Valley Water District, Fontana Water Company, Monte Vista Water District, Ontario, San Antonio Water Company, and Upland. And the IUA region is not an island, of course. It's surrounded by a patchwork of regional and local agencies that are managing similar resources. So next, I'll provide a brief overview of the water supplies used in the region, some of the challenges that are associated with each of those. So the first one's imported water from the State Water Project. This is delivered by MWD via the Rialto feeder. You see the Rialto pipeline there, and that accounts for about 30% of the region's supply. That's roughly equivalent to 50 million gallons per day on average. IUA distributes this water to Fontana, Cucamonga Valley Water District, and to the Water Facilities Authority, which operates the Agua de Lejos water treatment facility. And then they send that water to some of the other agencies. Some of the challenges that are involved with imported water is a planned extended shutdown of the Rialto feeder for maintenance and upgrades. And the region could also experience an unplanned outage due to infrastructure failure somewhere in the State Water Project. This supply is also vulnerable to curtailment and drought, and there's an established program by which supplies are reduced under certain conditions. And the cost of imported water is expected to increase faster than that of other supplies. The Chino Desalter Authority, or CDA, is an example of the kind of the regional project that IUA would support. The CDA was created to extract and treat about 40,000 acre feet, or 13 billion gallons a year, of impaired groundwater in the southern portion of the Chino Basin. And this is high TDS, high salinity water. It's a long history of agriculture in the area, and much of that's been replaced by development. This is a key component of basin management. It provides hydraulic control of the basin. It also extracts high TDS water to manage the salinity in the Santa Ana River. about 16 MGD average of water from this goes to agencies in Chino Hills in Ontario, and some of the rest of it goes to other agencies outside of IUA. Local surface water is also a supply, small supply. Some agencies in the northern part utilize these, roughly 11 million gallons per day on average, and these supplies are vulnerable to drought. Local groundwater is a significant resource in the region, and it's key to the region's water supply resiliency. There's multiple groundwater basins. The Chino Basin is the largest basin there in the center. It has significant groundwater storage and banking potential, about 500,000 acre feet storage capacity, or 165 billion gallons. In all, in a typical year, the region uses about a little more than 100 million gallons per day of local groundwater. And challenges to this supply include groundwater impairment, formal agricultural and industrial activities, and potential regulatory changes. There are changes to the maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs, for perchlorate that are being considered to lower the state's MCL from 6 parts per billion to a lower level. And regulation of per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, such as PFOA, PFOS, and PFBS, all have notification and response levels. And the Chino Basin Water Master manages the adjudicated Chino Basin and has a tremendous amount of data that's really vital for planning. Water quality impairment, still talking about local groundwater, water quality impairment has a significant impact on the use of local groundwater resources. Using data assembled for the model that I'll be describing, the pie chart here illustrates the portions of the region's groundwater that currently require treatment or blending. There's some blending allowed for certain things for use as drinking water, and those supplies that are currently offline. And currently, a little less than a quarter of the groundwater supply capacity is offline, primarily due to water quality impairment. And this is based on current regulations and would be further impacted by future changes in regulations and detection of contaminants of emerging concern, such as PFAS or others. Finally, there's a web of interconnections between IUA agencies and to other agencies outside of IUA. I don't expect anyone to be able to read this, the flow chart there, but it's just to illustrate there are a lot of interconnections. Some of these are active and others are standby for emergency use. And these all provide opportunities for these agencies to share supplies when they're needed. IUA also supplies recycled water for direct use, and they also use it for groundwater recharge. In 2019, they used about 15 million gallons per day, or about 15 million gallons per day average was supplied for direct recycled water use, and about 11 million gallons per day on average was used for groundwater recharge. The groundwater recharge is also supplemented with stormwater and with imported water from the State Water Project. And this is all accomplished through a series of recharge basins like the one shown in the photo. The region is also considering and also currently evaluating direct injection of recycled water. Recycled water is not included in the model that we're going to be talking about. It's just potable water. So the IUA's Integrated Water Resources Plan. Integrated water resources planning is necessary to efficiently manage all these resources in a way that provides benefits for all in the region. IUA's 2016, refer to it as IRP to shorten it, shown here is the region's blueprint for ensuring reliable, cost-effective, and environmentally responsible water supplies. To provide better support for collaboration, in 2018, IUA initiated the development of the IRP infrastructure model as a decision support tool to evaluate different infrastructure and management strategies that could improve the resiliency of the regional system. And The model includes major infrastructure such as major pipelines, pump stations, treatment facilities, wells, surface water supplies, pressure reducing valve stations, and interconnections. And it's really regional in scale, and it doesn't to look at regional issues, and it doesn't try to duplicate the detail of agency level distribution models. That's, you know, the agencies have that all. They cover that with their own work. The current model is a water budget distribution model only, and it doesn't directly incorporate or link to groundwater models developed by the Water Master. Now I'll talk a little bit about the model itself. To gather and verify the information used to build the model, we reviewed all kinds of existing planning documents provided by agencies and had one-on-one meetings with them to ensure that understanding. The model's really focused on the key constraints to moving water from zone to zone within agencies and then between agencies to look at these regional problems. And reviewing feedback from the Water Master and others was also very critical. The exercise in building this was very useful for sorting out some inconsistent information, just differences in the way different agencies understood what the capacities of different interconnections and things were. And out of this, a geodatabase was produced that contains basically all the IRP relevant information on all the major water supply infrastructure in the region. And the geodatabase is expandable, and it's actually already been expanded to include some other agencies outside of IUA that might be collaborating on future projects. The model is built in InfoWater, which is the software that IUA uses. And it represents a regional system, and again, doesn't duplicate that member agency, the retail agency level of detail. It represents the water balance at the pressure zone level, and it includes all supplies and interconnections and hydraulic constraints pertinent to the ability of the agency to meet demands in that pressure zone and to move water from zone to zone. Some of the wells in the region have blending requirements, and those were all identified by those agencies. And in the model, those wells have to have an adequate supply of suitable blending water in order for them to remain in service in the model. In the baseline model, supplies are used as needed to meet demands. And then in scenarios that we'll look at, all the supplies available in each scenario were modeled to illustrate where potential surpluses and deficits exist. The 2020 baseline of demands and supplies was used to validate the model results. And as previously mentioned, the member agencies provided input on vulnerabilities that they saw in the region. And some of those include those listed here: the shutdown of the State Water Project, the Rialto feeder, water quality impairment, regulatory changes, and severe drought. And from these vulnerabilities, scenarios were developed to stress test the regional system and assess the relative risk to the region and to individual agencies that are presented by these by each of these vulnerabilities. The 6 scenarios that were used to stress test the regional system are listed here. They range in likelihood from very likely, basically certain, like they know that the Rialto feeder will be shut down, to unlikely, an exceptional drought beyond what they've seen before, on top of regulatory changes, to really get kind of a range. And the likelihood of that, of each of these scenarios, factors into the calculation of risk. So I'd like to take a brief moment to explain the regulatory change scenarios, because that was an important one. Based on review of current regulatory activity, so what we see coming in terms of PFAS regulation and the potential change to the MCL for chlorate, and input from member agencies on what they're concerned about. Those 2 things were identified as those are anticipated. Those are coming in some form or another. And so scenarios were developed based on well-specific data where it was available and general data where it wasn't, to craft those scenarios. And then finally, an unknown future regulatory change which is for a yet to be identified contaminant of emerging concern, was also considered. So for the stress test results, based on all these scenarios, for each, the model was run with all available supplies, given the specific constraints of each scenario. So water quality impairment, hydraulic constraints, everything. And the results reflect the regional system. So the results of these scenarios, these stress tests, reflect the regional system as it is, and they don't necessarily reflect projects that some of the agencies already have in the works. They know what some of their vulnerabilities are, and they're already working to address those. With the model results, the surpluses and deficits were determined at the regional and agency levels, and a combination of them was used to rate the severity of consequences of each scenario. And then so the severity and the likelihood were used to calculate the risk of represented by each scenario. So bringing that together, here you see the relative risk of each scenario is plotted based on the likelihood and the severity. And the results shown in the figure are aggregated at the regional level. And these may not necessarily reflect the way that an individual agency would see the risk. But something similar will be done for individual agencies too, to see who has the most to gain by addressing a certain vulnerability. We can begin to see the relative impacts of specific vulnerabilities and potential opportunities to address them. And here we see that the highest risk scenarios all share vulnerabilities related to impaired groundwater and regulatory changes. And that in general, this presents a greater risk than interruption or curtailment of imported water supplies. Again, specific agencies may see this differently given their specific circumstances. And with this, we can illustrate the value of different water infrastructure and management strategies. Two significant areas are groundwater treatment to provide resiliency against regulatory changes, and enhancing those local supplies to provide resilience against interruptions. These projects that agencies have in mind may also be aided by other regional infrastructure projects to share those benefits and costs with others, with some of their neighbors, and optimize overall capital efficiency. Each scenario, or the stress test results with proposed projects will be compared to the baseline to evaluate benefits. So the next steps in the region are to explore these opportunities. And this is for a future update of IUA's IRP, be to evaluate project portfolios and management strategies. And the model will be used first to help agencies evaluate the resiliency benefits of projects that they already have in the works, and to identify potential synergies between those projects and maybe some regional projects that can help share the costs and benefits of those. Can also be used to explore the potential benefit of temporary transfer of some IUA or CDA capacity rights from agency to agency, from those with surpluses to those with deficits. And IUA will work to collaborate with member agencies to develop regional project portfolios that complement the agency's own projects. And those portfolios will be stress tested compared to the baseline, and then the risk reduction quantified at the regional and agency level. And these results will be used to understand those shared benefits, negotiate cost sharing, and very importantly, to obtain some of the grant funding that Stephanie spoke of. So, and beyond the future update of the IRP, the infrastructure model, it also provides a tool for ongoing regional collaboration. Some areas of future work that IUA's talked about are collaborating with the Chino Basin Water Master to better understand the water supply risks posed by PFAS and some of these other contaminants as more data is obtained, and also to evaluate the resiliency benefits of in a more systematic way of current and proposed regional programs. Integrated water resources management is an ongoing endeavor in the region, and IUA continues to look for ways to support effective collaboration to manage the region's resources in a way that protects the environment, ensures resiliency of supplies, and preserves affordability. And that concludes my presentation on IUA's IRP infrastructure model and its use to foster regional collaboration. I just wanted to acknowledge Joshua Aguilar at IUA and Abhishek Singh and Eric Fox with Interra. Thanks very much for your interest, and look forward to the discussion at the end of the presentations.
Thank you, Dan. While we are transferring to Erin, there is a question here, Dan. What's the thought behind injecting non-potable and stormwater into groundwater? Is it just injected into those groundwater sources that are already impaired?
Injecting treated, like recycled water, I presume. There are a couple of different objectives in this area. There's actually some. There is subsidence issues that need to be addressed that can factor into where it's targeted. It's not necessarily just injected where there's impaired groundwater. You can imagine it's a very complex system. So and it's adjudicated. So injecting the water and extracting the water is looked at as a complete problem. So not necessarily just for groundwater impairment, but that's certainly part of the decision making.
So one of the questions I might add to that also is, what's the quality of the injected water? Is it treated water? Is it treated to tertiary? That's wastewater, is that right? Is it treated to secondary, tertiary, or what level is it treated to? Because that's what will determine, if it's high quality and injected.
Sure. Well, in California, California has their Title 22 regulations for use of indirect use of recycled water for the infiltration basins, and then also for direct injection. And it's very, very stringent regulations. There's the level of, I'm going to mangle these, but I think the required level of, or the required log removals for virus and cryptosporidium and others are on the order of 10 and 12 logs. So it's very, very highly treated water. It's far beyond tertiary treatment.
Okay. So does it contribute to additional groundwater impairment, or has it changed things like that?
Again, that's going to be such location specific. That's also looked at very closely, like in LA County, where they have they use treated wastewater for some of the saltwater intrusion injection, or the barriers.
Mm-hmm.
That water's tracked very closely to see that it's not impairing the native groundwater, and it's the water going in, it's extremely it's very, very high quality. But it's also important to evaluate whether there are any geochemical, whether there are any other impacts caused by the injection of that water.
Okay. So Dan, can you stop sharing, and so that you can have Erin start sharing? And is there any other question? I cannot see hands at this point, but I'm not sure if Lani, you can see any hands raised. If someone has a question, please speak up. We can let you go ahead and ask the question.
I don't see anything, but again, give a shout out if you need to share.
So thank you, Dan. And Erin, please go ahead for your presentation.
Thank you. Yes, if you could please give me presenter capabilities. I can't share yet. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and I guess good morning for some. Very pleased to be here today. Again, my name is Erin Morey, and I'm the Director of Demand Management and Resilience Policy in the Integrated Water Management Group at the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, or DEP. I'll try to refrain from too many acronyms, but that is one that I'm going to use. Today I'm here to present on how we're embracing a One Water framework in New York City, and ultimately we're working toward developing a One Water plan for New York City. Like many other utilities across the country, we have many competing needs, drivers, and challenges, and we see One Water as a tool that will support us in building upon our past successes and to continue to prioritize cost-effective and equitable ways to manage all of our water resources here in New York City. And I will say that we are only in the planning stage at this point. So I'm going to focus on how we're currently thinking about One Water, and again, some of those objectives, challenges, and opportunities. So first, just a little bit about DEP. We are the largest combined water and wastewater utility in the country. We have about 6,000 employees and an annual budget of more than $1 billion. And we're centralized, so we manage all the water, wastewater, and stormwater for the entire city. On the water supply side, we deliver nearly 1 billion gallons a day to 9 million New Yorkers, so about 8.3 million here in the city, and then also the remainder are upstate. And we have 7,000 miles of water mains. And we also protect approximately 2,000 square miles of watershed in upstate New York and 19 reservoirs and 3 controlled lakes. And then for wastewater treatment here in the city, we treat about 1.3 billion gallons a day at 14 wastewater resource recovery facilities. We also operate 96 pumping stations and have about 7,500 miles of sewers. And then finally, we also enforce the air code, the noise code, and regulate hazardous waste throughout the city. So at DEP, we have a small but mighty, in my opinion, integrated water management team. There's 5 of us on this team, and we are leading this One Water effort at DEP. And we're in the Bureau of Sustainability, so we spearhead policy development, innovative partnerships, studies, and pilot programs to reduce system demand, protect our critical infrastructure, increase cost efficiency, and promote equity. We formed in 2016, so 5 years ago, and at that time we developed the vision statement that is shown here, and it continues to evolve, but also guide our programming today. And identifying these synergies between stormwater management and water quality, water reuse, climate change resiliency, and water conservation has been the focus of our team. And through our efforts, we're aiming to balance all the competing needs, competing infrastructure needs, and the future risks associated with climate change, and also the increasingly stringent regulatory requirements that we face as an agency, while making the best use of our resources and also keeping rates affordable for our 840,000 customers. So that's a good segue to my next slide, which is why One Water and what are our drivers and challenges? Well, we have many of them. Some of them are shown here. First and foremost, really our biggest challenge, I think, is regulatory requirements. So like many utilities across the country, we have several regulatory requirements for drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater, which can be resource intensive and also can take precedent for funding. So one of our largest regulatory driven programs is our long-term control plan program for water quality improvement and CSO reduction. We are under consent order with our regulator, which is the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And the goal is to identify additional CSO controls necessary to achieve the water quality standards and regulations in the Clean Water Act. And it's already been a priority of ours for decades. We've spent over $45 billion in the past decade to reduce our annual CSO volume by over 80%. So and also water body testing shows that water quality in New York Harbor is the cleanest it's been in over 100 years. But there's always more work to do. So in the coming decades, we'll be investing additional money, billions of dollars, into capital improvement projects to further improve water quality. Another major regulatory requirement we have is our MS4 permit, which is municipal separate storm sewer system for the separately sewered areas of our city. So we have combined and separate. And so this is the focus of this is to reduce pollution in stormwater runoff, which is also a investment that's quite large. And so like other utilities, in terms of infrastructure reliability, our system is very old, very aging, and it's also very vast. So it can require more maintenance and replacement and repair. Similarly, maintaining state of good repair of our existing infrastructure can become even more challenging since it is aging. And that's not to mention the fact that we have new requirements as well, some of which are regulatory driven for new infrastructure. A third driver and challenge for us in New York City is climate resilience. So we are very water rich in New York City, which is typically a blessing, but sometimes it can be a curse. So we do have to contend with extreme storm events and sea level rise, which can greatly affect our infrastructure. We saw with Hurricane Sandy that it brought devastating flooding and infrastructure damage. And then we also contend with flooding that doesn't just impact our infrastructure, but other areas of the city, and it can be extreme at times. Plus we deal with other climate change stressors like urban heat island effect, which also has effects. And although we know that precipitation is expected to increase in New York City in the coming years, we still need to plan for drought patterns and temperature changes, as it can affect the ability for our reservoirs upstate to refill and to meet the increased demand that we have in the summer months. So that means that we have to prioritize investments in wastewater and stormwater resiliency. And one of those investments is cloudburst planning. So under our cloudburst program, we're looking at extreme rain events called cloudbursts to determine those opportunities to route that flow of water away from infrastructure and property to minimize damage during those cloudburst events. And it builds upon our existing green infrastructure program and provides added function above and beyond what green infrastructure provides. And also it's an integrated water management tool as well, as it provides opportunities like water reuse. And then the fourth driver and challenge that I have here is sustainability. So in terms of sustainability and carbon footprint, it's actually quite large for us as a utility. We are one of the largest sources of municipal greenhouse gases in New York City. We account for 18% of those emissions by city agencies. So this means that we have a lot of potential to achieve energy and climate neutrality, especially from a resource management and recovery strategy. In fact, we're working to reduce our emissions by 40% by 2025, which is mandated by city law. So that's definitely one of our drivers and challenges as well. And then finally, last but not least, is equity and affordability. So we're actually one of the most unequal cities in the United States in terms of income distribution. And the income disparities highlight this need to focus on metrics other than median household income, for example, to capture some of those disproportionate impacts that water and wastewater costs have on households, especially those in the lowest income brackets. So we're exploring how we can better incorporate affordability and equity into our investments and how to balance these competing needs while ensuring that everyone in New York City has equitable access to our resources. So with those challenges, what are our objectives for One Water? So again, we believe that One Water as a framework offers us the opportunity to turn all of those challenges into implementable solutions. And ultimately, we believe that we can help to create this collective long-term vision for a more balanced approach to managing our water resources with widespread support, we hope, across DEP, our regulators, New Yorkers, and stakeholders alike. And all of these objectives shown here are certainly interconnected. And it's our goal as the Integrated Water Management Group to really zero in on those interconnections and relationships to achieve each objective to the greatest extent possible. So it's certainly a tall order, what I've described, but attainable to balance our competing needs and achieve our objectives. And fortunately, we do have a history of holistic planning to help guide us. And I show 3 of those examples on this slide, starting with our watershed protection program. So for more than 2 decades, we have funded and implemented a comprehensive long-term watershed protection program that focuses on both proactive and corrective initiatives to ensure that our source water quality, which serves nearly half of the entire state of New York's population, remains extraordinarily high. And one important aspect of this plan is the stakeholder engagement program, which has many diverse stakeholders from 8 counties that make up the watershed. So several organizations are directly implementing programs with funding provided by DEP to achieve the goals in that plan. And so this model of stakeholder collaboration has worked extremely well for us, and we will be following this example for our One Water stakeholder outreach. Second, we have the Jamaica Bay Watershed Protection Plan, which focuses on water quality in Jamaica Bay, which is one of our most ecologically diverse water bodies in the entire city. And one important aspect of this plan is that it includes gray infrastructure, green infrastructure, and ecological restoration initiatives and projects to enhance the bay. So it's an all of the above approach. It's a One Water approach. So we can definitely borrow from that as well. And then finally, we have the New York City Wastewater Resiliency Plan, which focuses on assessing climate risk and adaptation for all of our resource recovery facilities and our wastewater infrastructure. So for this plan, we performed a risk analysis of the critical flood pathways of our facilities and took stock of the assets that were at risk. And what we found is that a portion of all of our 14 wastewater resource recovery facilities and 60% of our pumping stations are at risk. So overall, the plan showed that by investing $315 million in flood protection, we could avoid $1 billion in damages if all of these assets were inundated by floodwaters. So these risk assessments, the cost benefit analyses, the adaptation analysis performed are also key tools and metrics that we can use for One Water. And we're going to follow a similar path for identifying and quantifying our One Water metrics and goals, particularly those for resiliency. So moving forward and in the immediate future, we're going to continue to define our goals and metrics and outcomes. We're going to continue internal engagement across our agency and also begin our external stakeholder outreach. And in addition to building upon our past successes, we're also following the example of other cities who came before us, and we're actively engaged with them, including Seattle, Denver, and Los Angeles. We recognize that many cities have had huge success with this approach, and we're looking to learn from them. And ultimately, our goal is to release a plan in 2023 and incorporate our One Water approach into the next citywide sustainability plan, which will be due in April 2023. And our plan is mainly going to be an in-house effort, and we'll build upon our current initiatives and past initiatives, our pilot programming, studies, and research. And at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is to create this paradigm shift and achieve this more balanced approach to all of our priorities and goals. So with that, I thank you for your time and the opportunity to present today, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and please feel free to reach out with any questions as well.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for all the presenters. I really appreciate that you share your time with us today And thanks for all the attendees who have shared their time with us today. With this, I will start opening it for questions. And I think we have a question here. Has New York City assessment of climate resiliency been shared with other agencies in the region? Has it helped other agencies in the region identify and begin to address their own risks?
That's a great question. Our studies and the work that we've done in climate resiliency have certainly been published, whether it's our Cloudburst program and our partnership with Copenhagen, the Wastewater Resiliency Plan as well. And we actually, I'm not sure if it's been released yet, but we also just worked on some stormwater resiliency mapping, which if it hasn't been released today, will be released shortly. So I do believe that other cities look to us, and we're certainly able to provide all the analyses on our website and beyond.
So with this, I will open it for the audience, the attendees to have, if you have any questions, please go ahead. I'm not sure if the raise hand is working. Seems it was not working early on, but if it's working, please raise your hand and let's start asking open it for questions for the presenters. I can start while people are still collecting their thoughts and preparing their questions. So what have been the trade-offs balance between the scale and complexity, kind of stakeholders, jurisdiction of your integrated water planning effort? So this is a question for the panelists, and whoever is ready to take that question, please go ahead. So again, this is the question is, what have been the trade-offs or the balance between the scale and complexity of your effort for the integrated water planning management, with regard to stakeholders, jurisdiction, process, and all of that?
I can start. I'll take a stab for New York City. And, again, we're just in the planning phase, but I think that this question is still relevant to us. So obviously, we're very complex. We are a huge agency. We have a lot of people within our agency. We deal with, obviously, our regulator, but also other city agencies. But I will say that it is kind of a blessing that we are centralized, because we are able to make decisions for the entire for all water resources in the city. So in that way, it is helpful. In terms of stakeholders, it's also very complex. Obviously, we have a ton of stakeholders with a ton of needs and a ton of opinions on what they're looking for us to do and how best to represent them. So a challenge for us is one, making sure we're reaching all of our stakeholders, because the network is so vast, and two, making sure that those stakeholders who maybe have a less loud voice than some other stakeholders are heard just as much as those more vociferous stakeholders. We want to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity and chance to voice their concerns and what they're looking for. So I think that as we start our stakeholder outreach, we really are looking to involve them at the beginning, which is an important lesson learned from other cities, that it's really important in order to get that buy-in for One Water that you do involve your stakeholders at the start.
Anyone else want to add to that question?
Sure, I can. So with the integrated regional water management in California being a funding type of carrot out there, it tends to really reward projects that are relatively simple and what's called shovel ready. So you tend to have done a lot of work in order to get to the point where you can get funding in the background. And that's, it means that kind of more complicated systems, more complicated projects, things with more moving parts often have less of a chance of getting funded. So that's kind of a trade-off.
Yeah, Ali, I'll chip in there too. I mean, I agree with everything there. I mean, it's a very relevant thing to understand, and you know, with different jurisdictions and different entities responsible for, depending on where you're at, water, wastewater, stormwater, and thinking, experience has been that thinking of the scale at which the benefits and the costs can be, shared, and because I mean, in the end, you need to get all those stakeholders like agreeing this is an issue we need to address, and let's all get together and do something about it. So it's a really it's maybe one of the most important decisions that happens in this kind of planning. It's like, what's that scale? And then once you get to work, that still doesn't mean that there's kind of concentric circles, so you're, even though you've focused on this group of stakeholders to try and come up with concrete solutions to problems, some of those may end up involving others outside. So it's a very important thing to really think through. But I think kind of like coming back to like a scale that helps focus on shared problems and shared solutions is kind of the right guide to get you to the right scale, I believe.
Thank you. Do we see any questions from the audience? Anyone who is having any question wants to ask to the presenters? I think I can ask my second questions while people are still thinking about the presentations. I think one of the questions, and it's always a topic that I have dealt with in different places around the country where I worked, which is how, in your experience, how you encourage, incentivize collaborative planning, sharing of costs and benefits. What kind of methodology, or what are the things that you have used to encourage and incentivize the collaboration at that planning level, determining the sharing of costs and benefits? What have you used in your experience? What worked for you in your experience? Especially when you are developing the IWRM, it's just you have so many stakeholders with different needs and different backgrounds that are involved in the development of this plan. So how to make it work for everyone, and how you convince them that it's going to work for everyone.
And it's a really good question. I mean, certainly the state of California puts these enormous pots of money out there. And so that's the incentive to participate. That said, the grants are typically so complicated. And our joke is that it's not over until we've all cried, out of frustration, mainly just frustration, deep frustration with the grant reporting. So not all agencies want grant funds, so they'll still participate within our group, but they're just not going to go after those grants because they found it's not worth it. It's certainly not free money, but it may not be worth it to them at that point. So good question. That would be my take on it.
Ali, I just make the comment that I know it's different. It's different all across the country. I mean, I know in other parts of the country we're really we're jealous of the funding that's available in California to do some of these projects. So with that grant funding not available, it kind of comes back to this helping understand what those common problems are, and then if there is a shared solution that's going to work better in the long run for everybody, figuring out how to walk everyone through that process so that they clearly see that, you know, doing something together is in the long run better than all of us doing our own thing individually. You know, so it's I think, you know, the grant funding is a great carrot, you know, to have, but where that's not available, you know, it just really comes, it can come back to that hard work of just like helping figure out how to do the right technical work and then how to communicate it effectively to, you know, a wide variety of stakeholders so that, you know, everyone sees the benefits.
And I would agree with having shared goals. I think that's very important, and it's something we think a lot about in order to get this buy-in across the agency and across the city that we're going to need to move in this one water direction. We have to find out what those shared goals are, and also recognize that sometimes one stakeholder's goal may be different than another, and they are competing. There are trade-offs if you choose one goal above the other. So again, finding that common ground is definitely going to be crucial for us.
Okay. So, and this is a fundamental question because I think, you know, the topic itself of integrated water planning or one water in general is kind of a new concept to some extent. You know, even in California, it has been there for 23 years, but still it's that's relatively a new concept of the you know, siloed sectors that used to be, and you know, I'm calling them silos of excellence, because we were really good in managing stormwater, we were really good in managing wastewater, we are really good in managing water supply individually, and has been, you know, the norm that for a long time we don't talk to each other. And so what are some of the drivers, you know, is there any social, economical, and environmental factors that's driving the shift in your area to this new concept and people? And I know, you know, like you guys mentioned some of them, but I'm looking into more, you know, like grants, money in California, that's a carrot there. For you in California, in New York, you have you have some regulatory issues that will make you really need to manage the resources in a better way. So what are some of the other driving or drivers that you have seen in your work, you know? And I know cost is going to be a big benefit, you know, if there is an economy of scale impact on working together. Is that something that you are seeing as a driver? And how these different entities, and I think, Dan, in your presentation, you talked about, yes, there is this big plan, but each individual agency within that jurisdiction might have a different take on the goals or objectives. Have you seen any, how is that received, valued by those different stakeholders and groups? I know that's my question is all over the place, but let's start about the drivers. You know, do you see any social, economical, or environmental factors that's driving this shift to integrated water planning?
So I have one quick take, which is, you know, in the olden days in water supply management, people would stay at the same agency for like 40 years, right? And that's what they knew, and they knew their processes, procedures, and they had just immense institutional knowledge. But what you see with younger people is that they're much more willing to move around and to try different types of water resource management. And I think that in some way drives more commingling between the silos. So it's like a generational difference that is extremely useful in terms of building one water.
Thank you, Stephanie. Anyone else?
That's very, I mean, that's very interesting. You know, it's kind of that people getting out and kind of diversifying their own experiences. Yeah, I would agree. I think that's helpful. I think, you know, I mean, you know, you like think about everything coming back to affordability, you know, in the long run, you know, like with some of the examples in my presentation, you know, one of the big vulnerabilities is, you know, as we learn more about the occurrence of PFAS, you know, different perfluorinated compounds, and facing the we have hundreds and hundreds of wells through a region, facing the prospect of treating each of those with wellhead treatment, versus, the cost of that could be extraordinarily high. Treating that, it's not just on the producing the drinking water, but it's on the, treating the wastewater. Those regulations are getting more strict because that water's going down on, the everything that leaves the Inland Empire goes on down to, Los Angeles.
Mhm.
And so that, with all these, I think affordability, really kind of ends up, there's environmental regulations that are driving it, but, how to wrestle with those, I think affordability is just, because just doing, like a whack-a-mole approach would just be enormously expensive and difficult to manage. So I think it feels kind of like a cop-out saying this, but just the sustainability of the whole enterprise, funding and management.
I would completely agree with that. I was going to say affordability as well. I talked about, our regulatory requirements, which are only growing and the costs are only rising. We also have other, climate resilience to contend with. And in New York City, we're about 98 or 99% ratepayer funded, which means that the burden of cost falls to our customers, more than not, which means that we really need to make sure that we stay affordable and equitable, but still be able to raise rates when we need to cover the costs of these, immense infrastructure projects that we have, climate resiliency, et cetera. So it really is a balancing act. And, as Dan said, we can no longer do whack-a-mole. So I think that's where One Water and IWM comes into play as an important tool.
So I have a couple of questions in the chat here, and I will go through them. In New York City, do you see any difference in trust in the safety of the water supply among different populations?
I don't think so. We have really great relationships with our upstate communities because we are a wholesaler to some upstate communities. And because of the watershed protection plan that I mentioned, and because we do have a community water section at DEP whose main purpose is to perform outreach and to engage with our customers upstate, we really have a really good relationship and have communicated well just how high quality our drinking water is.
And another question for you, Erin, is what projects are planned to protect New York City from rising sea levels?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll defer just a little bit because the mayor's office of sustainability is largely and chiefly charged with a lot of the resiliency projects that we do in New York City. But again, when it does come to our wastewater resource recovery facilities and the infrastructure that we manage, we do have several physical, projects that we implement at our plants, and I can be more specific. Feel free to reach out to me offline, and I'd be happy to provide those examples.
Sure. This question is actually to us in the Met Council, and I will ask my staff also to jump into this. Lania is here also. How would you compare and contrast what Met Council does with planning compared to California and New York? And I think I have also Judy Sventek here. And so if anyone wants to start answering before I collect my thoughts and think about this question. So how we compare to what New York and California is doing. And I'm not sure if Judy or Lania wants to take a shot at answering this question.
Oh, Ali, I will defer to you as my manager.
I think Met Council is we are responsible. We are the regional planning agency. And so with that responsibility, it's our role is a very complex role in the metro area. We are a utility for wastewater. but we are a planning agency for water supply and water quality and stormwater management. We are the planning agency for the other parts of the water. So to come up with a plan for that requires us working with a lot of stakeholders, and I think that's one of the things that we are trying to do it. We are trying to do it at a regional level, but also we are trying, and this is from the water supply area, we are trying to do it at a sub-regional level. We divided the region into sub-regions, and those sub-regions, they have more of shared issues. They are sharing the same water source, and they have been working on other things other than water together to resolve some of these issues, like fire departments, other things. And so we just built on some of the frameworks of collaboration that they have, and we started working with them. I know that in California, there is a big carrot of the grants. And here in Minnesota, we are lucky enough to have a funding, which is the Clean Water Fund, that the state has since 2009, that can provide some of that support for some of these projects, that cross-sectional areas. And some of these projects, one example that we have been promoting in the Met Council is reuse of stormwater. And we have done a project in one of the baseball stadiums here where we collected rainwater and reused that for irrigation and flushing of toilets. And so I think there is different drivers. Again, there's different drivers. There's different social, economical, environmental drivers. Again, when Erin said that New York is one of the richest state, water rich, we are here have the same idea that we are water rich. We are targeting conservation. That's something that a lot of the communities agreed on. That's the direction for the future. We want to conserve water. How is the citizens responding to that? It's taking time before we can help the citizens realize that they are using a lot of water for irrigating their lawns, as example. So I think we are learning from others. There's things that others can learn from us also. And I'm not sure if Judy wants to add to that, if she is here, or someone from
Well, this is
the Water
Lania,
Resources Group.
and I would be interested to hear from the rest of our watershed team as well, because as we were talking through these presentations, I had to think in my mind. I was comparing it to here in Minnesota. We have our watershed management, and one watershed, one plan is a program where we're really looking at that long-term watershed planning and bringing a lot of different stakeholders together to identify shared priorities. And groundwater is a growing part of that discussion. And so those relationships are really growing. And I think it's a very interesting time here in Minnesota for that connection between surface water, groundwater, and then of course the impact of wastewater systems in there as well.
So I think I have a last question here, and then we'll end. I know it's time already. So the last question I have is, and this is for Stephanie. Can you talk about current and future collaboration between municipal and agricultural water users?
Sure. So in our regional water management group, which is our integrated regional water management plan group, we do have municipal agencies. We have 2 cities plus the county, and irrigation districts who are providing water for agricultural water users. Those are all in the same group in conversation with one another. And we do have what you would expect, kind of typical issues that come up. If we reduce our agricultural water use, does that mean more development will occur? Is everybody being asked to conserve equally? Like what sort of equity is there? Typically, the agricultural water users feel like they're being asked too much, and that the residential water users aren't doing enough. But new development does tend to be extremely water efficient everywhere, but especially in California. So I think those conversations happen in this group, and that's probably one of the best reasons for the group to continue, is it's the only place where everybody is really at the table at the same time.
Okay, everyone, thank you very much. We are 2 minutes over the time. I really appreciate our speakers. I thank you very much for taking the time today. I know that a lot of people are out of the office today because they are taking some time off this week. So I really appreciate you spending time with us, and thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to continue these discussions. I think you will have more questions from the people who attended today. I think we reached about 50 people today attending this webinar. This is one of the highest webinars that we have. You know, the highest we have is about 70. This is the second, came into second. So I think this is a good indication that there is a lot of interest, and I know you will get more questions from from the people who have been participating. And as I mentioned, we are going to record this seminar, and we're going to put it on our website. So feel free to guide anyone from your groups, you know, the presenters, your groups, who wants to see this again. And with that, I would really want to thank everyone who participated today, the attendees, and also the presenters, and have a very good day today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.